There is a specific moment from a gathering at Cambridge University that I think just perfectly captures this invisible crisis we're going to be talking about today.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah. So the scene involves a researcher, Zhu Lingling, and this young British medical student who we'll just call Kay.
And Kay is, on the surface, just the absolute picture of success.
Totally. He's only 23 years old, already doing his doctorate, and he just radiates this, this effortless confidence that you only see in people whose lives have been pretty smooth.
A life where things just kind of fall into place.
Exactly. So he's chatting with you, and she mentions that she's 30 years old. Now, that's 7 years older than him, but they're at the exact same academic stage.
And his reaction is just immediate.
Immediate and completely unfiltered. He laughed, a bewildered laugh, and just said, "Wow, you're so old."
Ooh.
Right. At first, it sounds like maybe a simple social mistake, maybe just a bit rude, but the reaction it caused in you was profound. She felt this deep, burning sense of shame and failure.
Because it wasn't about the age. That 7-year gap was a receipt.
That's the perfect word for it. It was a receipt for the cost of survival. Kay had speed, because his path was paved by his family, private schools, no debt, native English speaker, a whole safety net that let him just sprint.
While Zhu was slow.
She was slow because she was the first in her family to go to college. She was working constantly to pay off loans, learning everything in a second language, and on top of all that, carrying the weight of her family's expectations.
And that one casual comment just lays bare this brutal truth.
It really does. We all assume time is the great equalizer, that the clock ticks the same for everyone, but it just isn't true.
Not at all.
Some people are born as time heirs. They inherit these huge stretches of freedom, the right to waste hours without any real consequence. And then others are born into time debt. And they spend their entire lives just frantically paying back these invisible loans of duty and survival, and yet they still feel guilty for never, ever being fast enough.
And that's the core of it. So if you've ever felt like you're just constantly running, but you're losing ground, it might not be a problem with your time management.
It might be your time poverty.
That opening story is so powerful because it just forces you right away to distinguish between, say, managing your calendar and surviving a structural deficit. And this deep dive is all about the latter.
So what's our mission here today?
Our mission is really to unpack the systemic sources.
Yeah.
We want to reveal how this structural time poverty actually operates. It's not a personal failing, It's a consequence of huge systemic factors.
Right.
We're going to be looking specifically at how unpaid duties, these really rigid institutional deadlines, economic pressures that favor youth, and all this intrusive technology, how it all combines.
It all comes together to create these massive roadblocks.
Exactly. Powerful structural impediments to what you could call individual time sovereignty. We really have to understand why some people are just compelled to pay their way through life with their most limited resource, their unencumbered time.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Section 1. We're going to start by focusing on that massive, often invisible, and almost always unpaid labor that creates the first great drain on our personal time.
The burden of care.
The burden of care. And this brings us right to the core conflict between how our economy is structured and the messy, inescapable reality of human interdependence.
And to get there, we have to start by looking at this philosophical tension. It's a tension between the philosophy of homo economicus and the ethical demands of just being human.
Right.
This is the conflict that really kicks off all structural time debt.
So homo economicus, that's the perfectly independent, rational, self-interested market actor, the person who never needs help, never gets sick, and can always make the absolute optimal choice to maximize their own utility. That's the ideal of neoliberalism, isn't it?
Precisely. That ideal, that completely autonomous individual, is just foundational to how we organize labor markets, professional careers, institutional metrics, you name it.
But reality is so different.
Completely. Care ethics fundamentally challenges this whole idea. It argues that human beings are, by our very nature, interdependent. We exist in this complex web of relationships. We're vulnerable to change, to sickness, to aging, to dependency, all throughout our lives.
So the whole idea of a carefree worker is basically a myth.
It's a complete fiction. The system demands this impossible autonomy, but reality demands interdependence. And the tension really skyrockets because our financialized capitalist system relies on what's called social reproduction.
And that's just the labor of keeping humans, functional, healthy, and ready to go to work.
Exactly. But the system's relentless goal of infinite accumulation actively destabilizes the very processes that it depends on. Care takes time, it takes resources, and it almost always falls outside of any measurable market transaction.
So when these care needs inevitably pop up, because they have to, nobody's homo economicus all the time, what does the system do? How does the neoliberal framework handle it?
Well, it tries to account for them in three main ways. And all three of them ultimately just shift the systemic cost and the time burden right back onto the individual or the family. And that's what fuels time poverty.
Okay, so walk us through the first one. How do they handle this contradiction?
The first approach is to just hammer on personal responsibility. When our infrastructure fails, whether that's, inadequate public schools or unaffordable elder care, the issue is consistently framed as a personal failure.
A failure of the individual.
Yes, a failure to act rationally, to plan ahead, or, and this is the classic one, to simply manage your time better. This narrative is incredibly effective at privatizing a systemic failure.
So if you're completely drowning in work and family duties, the problem isn't the 40-hour work week or the lack of affordable childcare. The problem is you. You should have been more financially prudent, or maybe planned your family better.
You got it. It's a classic evasion tactic. It just totally ignores the structural costs and the fact that most people are already operating at full capacity.
Okay, so that's the first one. Blame the individual. What about the market? Isn't that supposed to solve everything?
And that's the second approach, framing care as a market problem. The thinking is, since markets are supposed to meet all needs efficiently, if there's a real need, a market solution will just pop up to fill it.
And we do see this, right? I mean, with the explosion of services like care.com, you can find someone for literally any need, from childcare to home care for an aging parent.
You can. And these platforms can be incredibly effective at connecting millions of users with providers. The market theoretically can meet every need, but
only if you're a time heir, only if you can afford to purchase your time back.
That is the crucial caveat. For anyone who is already struggling with financial insecurity, with time debt, this solution is just completely inaccessible.
Which naturally leads to the third option.
The third structural default. If the state has stepped back from social support and market solutions are way too expensive, the framework structurally reinforces the family as the proper locus of care.
So it all comes back to the family unit.
It shifts all the costs of care away from institutions and the state and puts them right onto the private family, which in reality very often means the unpaid, invisible labor of women.
It's a massive hidden subsidy for the corporate sector.
A huge one. And when you combine those three things, you've got individual blame, you've got expensive market fixes, and you have this default to unpaid family labor, what you get is a systemic crisis of care.
You mentioned that this crisis has two specific consequences. Time poverty, which we've been talking about, and something you called social depletion. We get the time poverty part, the lack of hours. But what exactly do you mean by social depletion?
Social depletion is the systematic loss of the time and energy that people need to invest in their communities, in things outside their immediate family.
So things like civic life.
Exactly. When people are constantly on that hamster wheel just trying to repay their time debt, they don't have the capacity, the emotional availability, the physical hours to engage in civic life, community organizing, volunteer work, or even just building resilient relationships with their neighbors.
So the crisis of care ends up eroding the very fabric of the community.
It does. It makes society more atomized, more vulnerable. The system extracts an individual's time just for basic survival, and in doing that, it strips the community of that social glue you need for any kind of collective action or mutual support.
Wow. So the very structures that could help ease the burden are dismantled because nobody has the time or the energy left over to maintain them.
It's a completely self-reinforcing crisis.
And the systemic conflict, this valuing of the autonomous individual over the interconnected one, you see it everywhere, but it's especially sharp in knowledge-based environments, like universities.
Acutely visible. We call this the careless institution.
The careless institution, because it's designed around the assumption that the ideal worker is, quote, carefree.
Yes, that they have no significant responsibilities outside of work, which allows them to dedicate 100% of their energy to the institution's goals.
And the performance metrics, the way they measure success, just reinforces this fiction.
Actively. Institutions prioritize what they call itemizable outputs.
Things you can count.
Things you can count. Securing grants, publishing in high-impact journals, meeting quantifiable teaching loads. But what they consistently and systematically undervalue or even actively penalize is the critical care work.
Like mentoring students, providing real, deep academic advising, serving on committees that actually improve the institutional culture, all that pastoral stuff.
All of it. So if a faculty member spends, say, 10 hours helping a student avoid burnout, or doing that deep relational advising that actually helps keep students enrolled,
that time is seen as a deficit. It's time that wasn't spent writing a grant proposal or another paper.
they are penalized directly relative to their peers who successfully offloaded that care burden, or maybe who never had it in the first place. And this reliance on the carefree worker model leads directly to the exploitation of emotional labor.
Which is the work of managing your own feelings and the feelings of others to meet the requirements of your job.
Right. And this labor, just like physical care, is not distributed equally.
So how does gender create an unequal distribution here? I mean, it seems obvious, but what's the mechanism?
It creates a substantial gender tax. Women, who often occupy a subordinate social stratum within these institutions, are just expected to perform a far greater share of this emotional labor.
They're expected to be the supportive ones, the collaborative ones, the deferential ones.
Yes, they have to turn this emotional work into a resource they can use to gain influence or stability. And in doing so, they often absorb the institutional anxiety or conflict that their male colleagues are just not socially expected to handle.
And this is where that gendered burden starts to stack up with a racialized burden, right? Creating this intersectional burden of care that is just uniquely draining.
That's a crucial distinction to make. Racialized women, for instance, Black women or other women of color in academia, they face an additional burden of care that's often very transactional.
What do you mean by transactional?
Research shows they're often expected to provide a lot of personal and relational care, the caring about your mental health kind of support for students and junior colleagues.
But they don't get it back.
They are routinely denied adequate professional care in return. That is, they're much less likely to receive the nurturing your career kind of support, the mentorship, the sponsorship, that leads to those all-important itemizable success metrics.
So they're expected to be the emotional shock absorbers, the moral center of the institution. But their professional judgment isn't given the same respect, and their own career path is deliberately stunted.
It's actively extractive.
Wow.
And it reflects this really fundamental lack of respect for their professional trajectory. This leads to what's called a severe double bind for leaders and academics of color.
Explain that. What's a double bind?
They feel this deep ethical obligation to mentor and advocate for marginalized students and faculty, which is a vital, caring, and frankly political act. But they also recognize that this huge time expenditure pulls them away from hitting those crucial career milestones, like publishing that big paper or securing a major grant.
So they're forced to sacrifice their own potential for broader systemic influence, the power that could actually change the institution, in order to perform the necessary immediate care in the present.
It's a lose-lose trap, and it's imposed by a system of time scarcity that only rewards the suppression of essential human labor.
And I imagine this structural contradiction, it must also foster some deeply inauthentic responses to care, especially when it comes to things like diversity and inclusion initiatives.
It absolutely does. This is where we run right into performative allyship.
Right, the performance of caring.
Yes. Performative allyship is the act of professing support for marginalized groups. But your primary motivation is really self-interest, or maybe public relations optics, not a genuine commitment to addressing the root injustice.
It's transactional. The leader is using the caring piece as a shield or maybe as a tool for their own personal gain.
Completely. This inauthentic caring allows leaders to claim they're committed without ever taking personal responsibility for the impact or the outcomes. It's especially useful if they're trying to manage the discomfort of privileged groups at the same time.
It's so cynical, and it just uses up the time and emotional energy of the very people it's claiming to support. So how do we tell the difference? How do we differentiate that from true, genuine commitment to care?
True caring leadership requires a foundation of authenticity, and a huge part of that is embracing vulnerability.
So being open about your own struggles.
Yes. Leaders have to be transparent about their own struggles and limitations with work-life balance and care demands. One leader in the research noted that if they aren't public about their own struggles and about the systematic changes they make to accommodate life, then there's no hope for people who have less power to advocate for themselves.
So in this context, vulnerability becomes a strategic act.
It's a powerful reframing, isn't it? Vulnerability as a demonstration of strength, of a real commitment to changing the status quo. It shows the whole institution that human life is messy and must be accommodated.
And this aligns with the idea that care, especially for marginalized communities, it's not just some refuge from injustice. It's a conscious, public, and really a political act.
It is. It's a key demonstration of advocacy. It's a disruption of those negative, careless patterns that keep systems of time poverty in place. When a leader intentionally works to optimize an institutional space so that people from all sorts of backgrounds feel genuinely cared for and feel like they're in a position to care for others without penalty.
That's the deepest form of caring leadership.
It really is.
Okay, so time poverty starts as this debt of care, and it's systematically magnified by institutions that only reward the speed and autonomy of the carefree worker. Now, if we move from that kind of institutional pressure of care to the rigid structural deadlines imposed by the economic system itself, we find the next major form of time debt.
The time prison of ageism.
Exactly. This is where we look at the specific rigidity that accelerates life into this frantic sprint with a mandatory finishing line.
And there's no place where this is more starkly defined than by the curse of 35 in the Chinese labor market.
The curse of 35. That's such a specific, hard line. Can you detail what this actually means for a professional in China?
It is severe. It's a form of age discrimination faced by Chinese professionals, primarily in the huge tech and internet sectors, but it's deeply embedded in the whole organizational culture. It's even in government policy.
So companies will just explicitly say, we don't hire people over 35.
Explicitly.
Yeah.
Many companies set hiring caps right at 35. And what's more, you often find this age limit in the recruitment rules for government civil service exams in a lot of provinces.
Wow.
So after you turn 35, millions of highly educated, experienced workers become uniquely vulnerable. They get laid off, and then they find the door just slammed shut when they try to find new employment.
35 just feels incredibly early for a career cap. I mean, especially when you think about the investment in education, the need for accumulated specialized knowledge in these fields. Why that specific age?
It's really the convergence of economic pressure and a preference for a certain kind of labor efficiency. Right now, China is facing significant economic headwinds. You've got the property crisis, ongoing trade conflicts, widespread workforce reductions, especially in tech.
Okay.
This perfect storm makes middle-aged professionals who naturally command higher salaries and better benefits the prime targets for being optimized.
Optimized. That's the euphemism they use for mass layoffs.
It is. So your accumulated experience suddenly becomes an immediate liability, purely because of the associated cost.
So employers have this clear preference for younger workers based on cost, but also intensity. And this is where the infamous 996 work culture comes in.
That's the context for all of this. 996 working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. It is a system that is designed from the ground up to maximize the extraction of time.
It's hard to imagine anyone over 40, maybe with a family, being able to cope with that level of intensity on a sustained basis.
And employers perceive that too. Workers over 35 are seen as less able to cope with the high-intensity workloads, partly due to a perceived physical decline, but also, and this is crucial, because of higher salary expectations that come with their experience.
And their accumulated time debt from things like mortgages and childcare makes them seem inflexible for the 996 model.
Right. So the older workers are redefined. They go from being an asset to a liability.
And the younger workers?
The young workforce is viewed as human resources.
Yeah.
They're high energy, they're willing to tolerate high intensity, and they're amenable to lower starting salaries. They are seen as maximizing the return on investment for those few short years before they hit that perceived ceiling.
And the older middle-aged worker is seen as human cost.
Exactly. They represent overhead, they demand better benefits, they have an expectation of work-life boundaries that clashes directly with the 996 philosophy.
That is just a devastating shift in perspective. It forces people into this hyper-compressed career sprint with this tremendous pressure to hit all your milestones incredibly early.
And that brings us right back to Xu Lingling at Cambridge.
Yeah. Those who start slow because of structural disadvantages, they're essentially barred from the competition before they've even had a chance to peak.
There's this mentality that's captured, I think, brutally by the rag analogy.
The rag analogy.
Young workers are treated as a fresh rag. Their endurance, their experience, it's all used up hard, wrung completely dry by the intense 996 schedule.
And then they're just discarded.
They're discarded like a disposable rag once their energy is spent, and they can no longer maintain that intense pace.
Wow. That's just brutal. It directly links time poverty to physical and mental depletion. The system literally consumes a person's time until there's nothing left.
Nothing but the empty shell of their former self. The psychological cost must be immense.
I can't even imagine the loss of identity, of professional purpose, when decades of your accumulated expertise are just suddenly deemed worthless because of an arbitrary number.
And of course, this structural curse is amplified by gender discrimination. It creates a double curse for women. They have to face both age and gender discrimination at the same time.
And since women are already shouldering a disproportionate share of the time debt of care, this must make them look like exponentially riskier hires in an employer's eyes.
Absolutely. In job interviews, women often face this intense scrutiny about their family life. They get explicit questions about their marriage and childcare plans, questions that men are very rarely asked.
And that is pure time-related scrutiny.
That's all it is. Employers are assessing the likelihood of future time debt that the woman might incur because of social reproductive demands, and they are pricing that risk directly into the hiring decision.
The system just assumes the care debt will fall to the woman, so she's marked as a riskier, less available hire from the get-go.
And we see the real-world consequences of this. Professionals who get laid off, they learn very quickly that being honest about your family commitments is a career killer.
I read about one woman who was laid off and felt she had to lie in her interviews about her child's age.
She did. She recognized that admitting to having a young child was basically a death sentence for her career prospects in that kind of competitive environment.
So once these experienced professionals, people who have high time debt for mortgages and families, once they're optimized out, what's left for them? Where can they go?
They're driven into the gig economy. They're forced to trade the formal security they once had for just a tiny bit of flexibility which they need to manage their severe time constraints.
And this phenomenon has been given a pretty vivid name.
It has. It's been termed the Ironman triathlon for professionals aged 35 and over.
The Ironman triathlon, that implies something just immensely grueling and endurance-based.
It refers to middle-aged men and women who, after being pushed out of their professional careers, have to rely on intense physical gig work, delivering food, delivering packages.
So they're applying their professional drive and logistical expertise to physical labor.
Just to meet their ongoing financial commitments and manage their time debt. It's a brutal trade-off. High stress, no security, immense physical exhaustion, but at least the job doesn't impose a rigid 996 schedule or discriminate based on age.
It's just a stark illustration of how structural time poverty leads to this kind of desperate survival labor.
And that structural pressure leads us directly to our next section, which is about how technology itself has become the tool that not only enforces the sprint, but also completely eliminates the finish line.
It forces work into an infinite game.
Precisely. This brings us to the technological mechanisms that are actively eroding the traditional boundaries between work and life. They intensify the perception that work is this perpetually ongoing commitment, an infinite game where the clock just never stops.
So we're talking about telework, ICT mobile work, TICTM, the ability to work from anywhere at any time, all thanks to pervasive digital technology.
Exactly. New ICT, new information and communication technology, it uncouples work from the fixed location of the office. And on the surface, that has clear, positive aspects.
Yeah, like reduced commuting time, maybe more autonomy over your workday.
For sure. But the reality is that the technology simultaneously facilitates this relentless intrusion of work into your personal time. The time you save on your commute is instantly claimed back by the digital work expectation. It actually increases your time debt.
So it sounds like a net loss for the worker, despite all the promised flexibility.
It is deeply ambiguous. For example, data from the UK shows that teleworkers work significantly longer overtime hours than people in the office.
How much longer?
An average of 9.8 hours of overtime per week compared to 8.4 for office workers. And, crucially, up to 80% of that overtime for teleworkers is unpaid.
So it's structural time theft, just facilitated by the blurring of boundaries. The technology makes the work visible, but the hours you spend doing it remain invisible to the payroll system.
Exactly. And the expectation of perpetual availability becomes the new default, regardless of what your formal working hours are supposed to be.
And we can quantify that expectation.
We can. Data from Spain shows that 68% of Spanish workers confirm they get work emails or phone calls beyond their normal working hours. In Finland, you see high percentages of workers reporting they're contacted outside of hours, mostly by email.
And the reasons they give are always something like helping colleagues or customers.
Of course. But that just masks the real systemic issue, which is that organizations are often designed to require constant, instantaneous problem resolution. And that effectively makes the worker a 24/7 on-call unit.
So TICTM results in higher work intensity, and it often forces workers into these supplemental unpaid hours. Let's talk about the health costs of this constant informal availability.
We define that constant informal labor as supplemental TICTM. It's the work you do outside the employer's premises using your own tech, and it typically amounts to unpaid overtime. It's a primary driver of time debt.
And this constant supplemental work, it just overwhelms any potential benefits you might get from autonomy.
Completely. It leads to significant physical and psychosocial costs. The data on this is really clear. High mobile TICTM workers, the people working from anywhere all the time, they report the highest rates of stress.
How high?
41% report high stress, compared to just 25% for people who always work at the employer's premises.
Yeah.
The cognitive load of just constantly monitoring everything is exhausting.
And it must destroy your sleep.
It severely impacts sleep quality. A higher proportion of both regular home-based teleworkers and high mobile workers, 42% in both of those groups, report waking up repeatedly during the night.
And what's the figure for traditional office workers?
Only 29%.
That's a huge difference. That's the consequence of hypervigilance. If your workday is totally elastic and can interrupt your sleep, your brain never fully shuts down. You can't get restorative sleep. You can never fully recharge or pay off your time debt.
Precisely. And multivariate analysis confirms it. The higher stress levels, the sleep problems, they're directly related to that supplemental work intensity. Autonomy and flexibility are touted as these great benefits, but when the work intensity is high, the flexibility is just the flexibility to work more.
You're just trading your mental health for the illusion of control.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So, since technology enables this kind of perpetual debt, are we seeing any successful efforts, either from institutions or governments, to fight back, to reclaim some of that individual time sovereignty?
Yes, thankfully. The necessity of the right to be disconnected has emerged as a really critical policy response. These are initiatives that try to limit the negative effects of perpetual availability and safeguard employees' rest periods.
They're asserting that time outside of work belongs unequivocally to the individual.
That's the goal.
Can you give us some powerful, tangible examples of this right to disconnect in action?
One of the most famous examples comes from the German car manufacturer, Daimler. They instituted a holiday mode policy that just fundamentally shifts the burden of communication.
What does it do?
It automatically deletes incoming emails for employees who are on leave.
Deletes them, not just like saves them for later. It actually gets rid of them.
The sender gets an auto response that says the emails are being deleted, and it directs them to an alternative contact. This is revolutionary because it eliminates the expectation that the employee has to come back to this mountain of work. It makes their time off truly restorative.
That is a structural assertion of time sovereignty. It forces the system to accommodate the absence instead of punishing the employee for it later.
It does. And we also see the German Ministry of Employment implementing a minimum intervention in leisure time policy. This legally restricts managers from contacting employees outside of normal working hours unless the situation is truly exceptional and absolutely cannot be postponed.
And critically, the policy explicitly states that employees can't be disadvantaged for turning off their phone or ignoring work messages outside of hours.
That's the key. It has to have teeth.
So has advising employees not to send messages outside of working hours actually worked? Or did it just create bottlenecks and problems down the line?
It has been successful. The Boston Consulting Group advised their employees to implement this restriction, and the employees who followed the advice reported improved well-being, including higher job satisfaction and greater motivation to go to work.
And what about performance? Did it drop?
No negative impact on overall performance, which suggests that the perpetual availability is often just supplementing work inefficiently, not driving core productivity. It suggests that boundaries actually improve engagement.
This whole struggle, striving for a fixed, finite win while you're trapped in this perpetually changing environment, it sounds like a philosophical trap.
It is, and this is where the framework of the finite versus infinite game becomes essential for understanding the structural causes of time poverty. It provides the ultimate lens.
Okay, so let's define the two clearly for everyone. The finite game is played to win. It's bounded by rules, it's bounded by time, and there's an unambiguous finish line.
Correct. The goal is termination. When the winner is determined, the game is over. Think of getting a specific certification, or completing a quarter's sales goal, or securing a particular promotion.
And an infinite game.
An infinite game is fundamentally different. It is played only for the purpose of continuing to play. It's unbounded, which means players are free to change the time, the space, the rules, whatever they wish as they go along.
So since the rules and players can change constantly, you can't even know what the victory conditions are.
You can't. The only goal is perpetual continuity.
And the argument is that modern careers, especially in the knowledge sector, have shifted from being a series of finite games to being one long, infinite game.
Absolutely. Achieving a win in a finite game, getting that tenure or that promotion, it only means you have earned the right to continue playing the larger, never-ending competitive game of corporate or academic survival. The infinite player just sees wins and losses in finite games as moments in continuing play.
So how does this change the concept of power and competence for someone who is perpetually in time debt?
It completely changes the required currency. In a finite game, power is historical. It's based on what you've already done, your past achievements, your ability to compel other people. You win to become powerful.
But in an infinite game.
In an infinite game, played in this non-stationary environment we're in, historical power has very limited meaning. The relevant concept is strength.
And what defines strength in an infinite game?
Strength is your capacity for adaptation, for resilience to surprise. It's defined not by what a player can force others to do, but by what a player can allow others to do while still being able to continue to play.
So the person in time debt is just constantly fighting to maintain the required strength.
That's it. They're just trying to maintain the minimum capacity to adapt, to survive the next layoff wave, to just keep playing the infinite game. And they're sacrificing all of their available time sovereignty for sheer professional survival.
So that reframes time poverty. It's not just a shortage of hours. It's a lack of the structural strength you need to dictate the terms of your own engagement in this unbounded competition.
And since the game never ends, the extraction of your time is continuous.
When we acknowledge that the game is infinite, it seems like institutions have to move away from these rigid, finite strategies.
They must. The time-based pressures we've detailed, they demand a fundamental shift in how organizations themselves are governed and structured. When you look at all of this, from the debt of care to the rigidity of ageism and the unbounded demands of the infinite game, the constant pressure demands a shift away from seeking absolute control.
So institutions can't just manage their way out of this crisis by enforcing more rules or more metrics because the environment itself is just too complex and fluid.
Precisely. They need to embrace that complexity, that adaptation, through new models of governance that actually acknowledge this non-stationary environment. And we see two complementary perspectives that they have to adopt: problem-centric governance and adaptive governance.
What does problem-centric governance require in practice?
It means the governing organization and all its processes have to be continuously adapted to the specific features of the problems they're facing.
So instead of looking for problems that fit their existing fixed methods,
they have to minimize their internal procedural constraints to maximize the use of all the available information. This requires a commitment to continuous organizational reform, and it requires accepting that the current design is never optimal. It's perpetually provisional.
You adapt the organization to the problem, rather than forcing the problem to fit the organization's rigid structure.
Exactly. And then adaptive governance complements this by making the organization more open and resilient. Traditional scientific management separated decision-making. It excluded the governed population. Adaptive governance corrects this. It opens up the decision-making process to the stakeholders, to the governed population itself. This recognizes that the people most affected by the policies often possess the unique local knowledge you need for effective solutions.
So you bring in the people who are actually facing the time debt, the ones who have the most immediate knowledge of the operational failures.
Yes. And the shift in attention moves away from the old, slow, predict then act model, which relied on analyzing policy options for ages before you did anything.
And what does it move towards?
Instead, the focus shifts to simultaneously monitoring multiple small interventions and continuously assessing their effects in real time. The future requires abandoning predict then act in favor of simultaneous monitoring and continuous learning. It requires recognizing that no single policy is ever going to permanently settle the issue of time poverty.
The goal is only to manage its continuous change and complexity.
And in doing that, you give individuals a chance to reclaim their time sovereignty.
So that is the ultimate institutional response to the infinite game. Understanding that the only way to manage unbounded competition is through continuous adaptive engagement, and that the organization has to be as resilient as it demands its workers to be.
Well said.
The insights we've drawn today, I think, they reinforce a critical conclusion. Time poverty is not a personal failure. It's not something that's cured by better prioritizing your tasks or waking up an hour earlier. It is a structural receipt. and it details the cost of survival in a system of unbounded competition that demands perpetual availability and systematically devalues the essential labor, the care that makes human life and society possible.